And the first aerial combats were between aircraft that were armed, but were not fighter planes. And I thought you'd get a kick out of seeing the Belgians' first days, which is sort of typical. Here he is in a Farman reconnaissance plane. He's the guy in back. He's the chauffeur. The gunner is in front, who's also the observer. And I enjoy the graphics that they used on these airplanes. Okay.
Oh yeah.
So this is how it started. And now here I've listed for you the first generation fighters and the times at the front. And there, of course, there were also experimental aircraft that never served at the front that are not on this list. And the ones that are battle planes have the red asterisks by them, just to give you an idea. So we had some real fighter planes and we had some battle planes. And the first generation fighter tactics basically were single aircraft working alone. And the idea was you find the enemy and you shoot at it. And eventually it became, the tactics evolved into like stalking tactics, like if you're going to be hunting game. And that's basically where it started from. And here is a typical First War aircraft. And wow, here's another one. And you can see that these are pusher aircraft with the pilot in back and the gunner in front with a flexible gun, so he would have the maximum field of fire and the maximum field of view. And here is a makeshift gun mount on this aircraft that didn't have, you can see, it did not have a synchronized machine gun. So the gun was fixed to the aircraft, offset to fire at an angle. And this is the aircraft of Leno Hawker, who shot down several planes this way and was one of the first Aviation Victoria Cross winners, and the first one who was a fighter pilot. Now later, that same type of aircraft was fitted with the synchronized gun after they were able to develop that, and you can see that the gun in front of the pilot. Now, in this, I wished I had a more, let's see, can you see this little cursor flying out over the, yeah. Okay, so here we have a fixed non-synchronized machine gun, and you can see these metal plates on the propeller. And this was the first aircraft, Roland Garros, a famous pre-war French pilot, put these plates on his propeller to be able to shoot through the propeller arc, and he shot down 3 German airplanes this way. And here's a photograph of a different Marine, Saulnier, with Jean Navarre. And here's a photograph of, let me see here. Pardon me. This is a little bit there. And here's the, right up here are the plates, and here's the gun. So the problem with this is, of course, some of these bullets hit those plates and got deflected back at the pilot, so it probably made it a little bit more exciting than we would like. Oh, and here's a Martinsyde. This one is an unarmed version, but some of them had a gun mounted over the top of the wing to fire forward. And I wanted to just give you a little anecdote here of what it was like to fly at this very early time at the dawn of the fighters. And on May 10th, 1915, which was before the Fokkers reached the front, Captain L.A. Strange had an interesting experience. And he says, on May 10th, 1915, I reached 8,500 feet when going after an aviatique. Not all enemy aircraft were equipped with machine guns in those early days, but the German observer potted at me from the rear cockpit with a pistol. And as some of his bullets came unpleasantly close, I thought it high time to retaliate and gave him a drum from my Lewis without much effect. But when I wanted to take off the empty drum and replace it with a full one, it seemed to jam. And as I was unable to remove it with one hand, I wedged the stick between my knees and tugged at the obstinate thing with both hands. After 1 or 2 fruitless attempts, I raised myself up out of my seat in order to get a better grip, and I suppose that my safety belt must have slipped down at the critical moment. Anyhow, my knees loosened the grip on the stick, just as the Martinsyde, which was already climbing at maximum angle, stalled and flipped over into a spin. As I was more than half out of the cockpit at the time, the spin threw me clear of the machine, but I still kept both hands on the drum of the Lewis. Only a few seconds previously I had been cursing because I could not get that drum off, but now I prayed fervently that it would stay on forever. The edge of the drum was cutting into his fingers, and incredibly strange managed to let go of the drum with one hand and reach up behind him to grab one of the center section struts. You never know what you can do until you're motivated. Okay? He then repeated this with the other hand. At least I felt rather more part of the machine than I had done in my original attitude. The Martinsyde was upside down in a flat spin, and he's hanging on outside the cockpit. My only chance in riding the machine lay in getting my feet into the cockpit. I kept kicking upwards behind me until at last I got first one foot and the other hooked inside the cockpit. Somehow I got the stick between my legs again and jammed on full aileron and elevator. The machine came over the right way up and I fell off the top plane into my seat with a bump. He grabbed the stick with both hands but found he could not move it because he was sitting directly on the control cables. When he had fallen back into the cockpit, he had gone right through the seat, with the result that he could barely see over the cockpit rim. So he throttled back, braced his shoulders against the top of the fuselage and his feet against the rotor bar. He pulled out the broken bits of seat, freed the controls, and pulled the machine out of its dive with very few feet left to spare before he hit the ground. It was then he realized he didn't have any instruments left, as he had kicked them all to pieces in the struggles to return to the cockpit. However, the absence of such niceties as instruments really didn't bother him. As he said, I felt happy to be alive and thought it simply marvelous that I was still able to control the machine. He flew back to his airfield and slept a good 12 hours, waking up extremely stiff and sore, but alive. Okay, so this is how things started out. And I thought you'd all kind of enjoy that. It was kind of like, well, I thought I had a bad day, you know? All right. So, it's the first generation fighters. Here is a French Marine Saulnier with the fixed unsynchronized gun and the armored propeller. And of course, the Germans respond. And here, this is the Fokker E-type, or Eindecker, as the Germans call it, Eindecker, meaning monoplane. And here is Tony Fokker in various photos of him developing a synchronizer. Roland Garros came down behind the German lines. The Germans captured him in his airplane, and they took it back to Germany and they immediately recognized what he'd been trying to do. They wanted, to copy that. And the problem was that the German bullets were steel jacketed and ripped right through those metal plates on the propeller. And it was very clear that that was not going to be a lasting solution to the problem. They gave it to Fokker, who claimed in his biography, or his autobiography, that he fixed the problem in 48 hours. That's quite obviously an exaggeration, but we don't know the exact story of how he did it, but Fokker and his team put it together, and here's some of the test rigs they were using to do that. Now, ironically, the synchronizer had been patented in Germany, in France, and in England by different inventors prior to the war, and had not been taken up by anybody. So here's the Fokker E-1, the world's first production fighter aircraft as we know it today, designed as a fighter, and you can see the synchronized gun for it. Okay, and that's Lieutenant Max Immelmann in the cockpit, and the Immelmann turn, which is an aerobatic maneuver, is named after him. Now, I don't think he invented it, but it was named after him. And here's a Fokker with two guns and a larger engine. And you can see he's got a two-row engine, two guns, and he's got that kind of smile on his face. He's got the best airplane in the world. Just look at that. Look at satisfaction. Okay, so obviously that was going to be, the Allies have to counter that. And of course, one of their counters was, without having a proper synchronizer, let's just put the gunner and the machine gun out in front of the propeller. And the SPAD SA series was an actually production example of this pulpit design. And they were actually flown in combat by the French and by the Russians on the Eastern Front.